Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the fourth module in the ongoing Yes series. Thank you all for joining, and it's so good to see most of the old participants and some new. And I hope you have a good time in the module and you all learn together. I'll pass on to, will take you forward in the module. Welcome once again.
Thank you, Aditi. And a warm good morning to all of you from freezing Delhi. And the love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch. As I said, we are starting on the auspicious day of Swami Vivekananda's birthday. And our institution is inspired by Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. And yet, uh, we have a great admiration and love for Swami Vivekananda. That's because, in fact, if you look at it from the historical perspective, there's a remarkable continuity from Swami Vivekananda to Sri Aurobindo. And they and many other spiritual masters like Sharadama and the Mother, uh, they all seem to be a part of a chain in the divine design in view of the type of wisdom that the world needed very badly around that time in history, and particularly India to wake up from its slumber. So that is the way we look at Swami Vivekananda and Sri Aurobindo. Uh, Swami Vivekananda antedated Sri Aurobindo. Swami Vivekananda was born in 1863, Sri Aurobindo in 1872. And when Sri Aurobindo returned to India in 1893, that was from England, that was the very year in which Swami Vivekananda went to the US and spoke at the Parliament of Religions in Chicago. And his speaking at the Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1893 was a sort of a landmark in the spiritual history of the world because it is it was an event at which he gave a new image to India, an image that had been tarnished through centuries, uh, for which India had been enslaved. And therefore, the usual understanding was that it is some sort of a primitive country with some barbaric practices and so on and so forth. That is the type of image we had. And he gave them the ancient Indian wisdom uh, in in such a way that in a form that they could understand, and they realized its universal significance. And Sri Aurobindo continued that as a spiritual master. And one way in which all this was very relevant to the world, and particularly India, was that in India, there had somehow grown through about 1,000-year period an idea that spirituality is something otherworldly. It is something meant for a select few who renounce the world and go away to the Himalayas or a cave. And the rest are condemned to an ordinary worldly life because of various obligations and compulsions. But forgotten was the long and glorious chapter in the history of India when spirituality permeated every aspect of India of life, every aspect of the life of an ordinary person. And it was during that period that India was not only uh, bringing spirituality into life, but also demonstrating to the world that when spirituality enters life, it neither contradicts in any way material progress, uh, nor does it in any way uh, compromise with spirituality. In fact, the spirituality also acquires meaning only when it's put into practice. And when put into practice, it enhances, ennobles, and enriches worldly life. It was during that period that India, uh, by bringing spirituality into every aspect of life, achieved the distinction of being second to none in the world when it came to uh, literature or music or art and even science and technology. So, the various sort of ordinary parameters of progress which we commonly look at, India was second to none in any of those. Uh, and perhaps not in spite of it, perhaps because of bringing spirituality into every aspect of life. Now, this is something which Swami Vivekananda emphasized and Sri Aurobindo emphasized. They made a very powerful case for why it should be done. And since India had forgotten it, uh, they tried to wake up this country to its greatness and to its heritage, and bring that same element, forgotten element, in a much more significant way in every aspect of life, uh, so that we could move towards that same glory. The country could achieve, reattain that glory. Uh, and of course, they also had an intimate contact with the West. So with both a synthesis of the East and the West, and what they taught was relevant to the world today, today's world, and not necessarily something restricted to the ancient past. So it was, the foundation was in the past, but the vision was highly futuristic. Why has the country decided to have the National Youth Day on same day as Swami Vivekananda's birthday? Of course, Swami Vivekananda was a spiritual master. Uh, what has youth got to do with spirituality? It's commonly uh, assumed that spirituality is only for old age. And this idea is rooted in the very fact that I was talking about, that spirituality is something otherworldly. The spiritual life and worldly life are not compatible with each other. And therefore, for living a spiritual life, one has to renounce the world. And since one cannot renounce the world when one is young, therefore, spirituality is only for old people after they have fulfilled all the worldly responsibilities. But that is not really true. The second thing that perhaps repels young people from spirituality is that's full of meaningless rituals and ceremonies and conventions and so on. Uh, and that is because of confusing it with conventional religion. But in fact, spirituality has none of these requirements. So, uh, spirituality is in fact not a compartment of life which has to be set apart and meant primarily as something for old age. Spirituality is a component of life, not a compartment of life. Further significance for young people is that they have a long time available in life, long time ahead of them, and therefore, uh, whatever they learn can be applied, and from that, they can benefit, the world can benefit. Not only that, it is the young people who have the capacity to learn new things and bring them into their life because they have not yet become rigid in their ways, they are capable of change. Now, turning from that to lifestyle diseases, the topic of this course that we are starting today, uh, lifestyle has a few well known components, although it's difficult to sort of split things, but all the same, for convenience, we do that. Diet, exercise or physical activity, smoking and drinking, and so on, these consuming substances of abuse, and sleep, and associated with all this is mental stress. Now, all these various components of lifestyle influence our health in a big way, and the effects are not dramatic and obvious, and that is what makes these diseases more uh, dangerous. The damage can start quite early in life in a young person who has, once again, we come back to youth. A young person who is not following a healthy lifestyle, in that person, the process of the damage that will eventually lead to lifestyle diseases has already begun. But then these diseases don't, these changes, this damage does not lead to any very obvious and dramatic results or consequences. And therefore, the person feels that nothing has happened to me, I continue to be healthy. But in fact, slow accumulation of such damage over a few decades is what will make the disease manifest sometime later in life as high blood pressure or heart disease or diabetes and so on. So that is a result of slow accumulation of damage over decades. And therefore, it's better to be conscious of it early. Um, why do young people take to an unhealthy lifestyle? They take to it because an unhealthy lifestyle can be very tempting. It is uh, gives more sensory pleasure than a healthy lifestyle. Secondly, uh, there's peer pressure. Others are doing it, so why not me? Every other is eating fast food. I can also have that. Uh, Nobody is taking physical exercise, just spending time on the computer and the smartphone. I can also do that. Not only that, if others are studying till late at night, they will do much better in exams if unless I also do the same. And therefore, there are subtle pressures which build around the person, and the person takes to a lifestyle that seems to be the currently fashionable and acceptable lifestyle amongst young people. And on top of that, as I said, the person uh, can get away with it. And therefore, he feels as if he's an exception. Nothing will happen to him. Even if he has some knowledge of what a healthy lifestyle is and what can result from an unhealthy lifestyle, he has this feeling that I can somehow get away with it. I'll be an exception because nothing actually happens to him. So, all this makes it even more relevant for a young person to understand what a healthy lifestyle is. And also, that even if the results are not dramatic, the results would eventually show up a few decades later. This unhealthy lifestyle, which has gained prominence in the last couple of centuries, particularly, uh, it was not the normal lifestyle of any population in the world in ancient times. So, how did we get there? Uh, Experts believe that agriculture in the world is around 20,000 years old. So, if agriculture is only 20,000 years old, what did people eat before that? The A theory that was current and unquestioned till relatively recently was that man was a hunter gatherer, which means that he hunted and gathered uh, dead animals, and therefore he was predominantly a non vegetarian, and that is how he had been surviving before there was any agriculture. But now there are many historians who have come to the conclusion, on the basis of a lot of evidence, that perhaps it was not so. Just because there was no agriculture doesn't mean there were no plants. And man is too weak a creature to be able to subsist entirely on hunting. And therefore, perhaps uh, he was not primarily a hunter, he was uh, someone who subsisted on grasses and other such plants, which are very coarse, not palatable, difficult to eat, and when you'll have to eat a large volume to get any energy out of them. But then that is the type of plants which man had in large quantity before agriculture evolved. So, having a selective set of plants which were growing deliberately as food, which is what we call agriculture, gave us grains which were rich in starch and fruits which were succulent and pulp, full of pulp, which has a lot of, apart from the nutrients, macronutrients, all the micronutrients, vitamins and minerals, and so on. So we started growing these starchy grains and fruits. So but then this was a change. This was a major shift in what man ate. But all the same, it was a type of shift, perhaps, which was in keeping with the resilience that human body has. And therefore, nothing really significant happened as a result of this change. Life became a little more convenient, food became more palatable, and perhaps the need for any animal food went down further when these plants were easily available as a result of agriculture. And this is what happened in the world, and particularly in India during the Vedic period. We find that that is the type of lifestyle and the diet that we had, which was primarily plant based. Now let's turn to relatively recent history. If you look at relatively recent history, we find that after the Dark Ages, which lasted about 1,000 years in Europe, uh, came the European Renaissance. And during European Renaissance, the faculty for reasoning could once again breathe freely. And this faculty of reasoning is what gave us modern science and technology. Gave us science, and then application of science gave us technology, and application of this technology led to the Industrial Revolution. Now, the consequences of this Industrial Revolution, particularly in the West, were firstly prosperity. It generated wealth directly, as well as because the Industrial Revolution made it easy for the Western powers to colonize many other countries, and they could then divert the resources in such a way that they got them from the colonies and enriched themselves. So it was so prosperity was one of the consequences, and another consequence was that food could be refined. Before we had the steel roller mills, you could not get white flour, maida. No, if flour, wheat flour, which has absolutely no fiber. You could not get it unless you have a steel roller mill. So technology made it possible to refine food beyond a point. And technology also gave us all those machines, which reduced the need for any physical work. So we got the effort saving machines. And another result of this was that because of various instruments and devices which came, the number of objects of desire multiplied. Everybody wanted to have those because they made life more comfortable, convenient, and in terms of sensory pleasures, more pleasant. Now, when you have a lot of objects of desire available around, uh, some people will be able to get them, some will not be able to get them. Those who will not get them will be under stress. That is understandable. But even those who get them are also under stress. So both fulfilled and unfulfilled worldly desires eventually lead to stress and misery. And we'll not go into the details of how that can happen. But those of us who have fulfilled some of the worldly desires realize that that is truly so. No desire that is fulfilled brings what was expected from it, and it comes with various price tags. And the result is that it eventually brings misery. And if no other misery, either we get saturated with it and therefore does not appeal to us anymore, or we start getting this insecure feeling of how long will it last. And the result is, in either case, stress once more. But let's look at those who could not satisfy their desires and therefore were under stress. They tried to work harder to get more money, and in the process sacrificed sleep, and therefore again entered another important aspect of unhealthy lifestyle: inadequate sleep. And many, to avoid stress, whether due to fulfilled or unfulfilled desires, took to smoking and drinking, because they too provide a short term solution to stress. Stress doesn't go, the situation does not change, but one can sort of feel for a moment that now I'm feeling better, the stress is gone. Say, particularly under the influence of alcohol, and the person is another world altogether. And for while he's under the influence of alcohol, he feels that all the problems have been solved, nothing really uh, matters. So the stress lead to various habits such as smoking and drinking. And whenever there is greater prosperity, one of the things is that one tries to consume more palatable and prestigious foods, and that's what happened as a result of the newly arrived prosperity, which came through industrial revolution. And people took to these foods, and which are the foods that are most palatable and prestigious both. And these are foods which are largely non-vegetarian foods, and foods which have a high fat and sugar content. So that's how we got where we got. And the result was that the lifestyle diseases became more and more prevalent, particularly in the Western countries. Coupled with this was medical progress, which also helped eliminate many of the old killers, such as nutritional deficiencies and infections. And as lifespan became longer, then there was a further um, increase in the lifestyle diseases because these diseases manifest only late in life. And therefore, if the people were living longer, they were more likely to be affected by the unhealthy lifestyle, which had come as a result of the so called development and progress that had taken place during these last few hundred years. And that's how we got there. Now, how did you first notice them that this is what has happened? The first, perhaps, uh, set of observations which made us aware of this were made by two British physicians, uh, Dennis Burkitt and Surgeon Captain Cleve. They didn't work together, they were working independently, so they made these observations independently. These British physicians both worked in Africa, South Africa, and observed that some of the diseases which they had learnt as very common in England were very rare in Africa. Uh, Diseases such as this high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes, etc., they were rather uncommon there. And they felt it was perhaps because of the diet, because these uh, primitive tribes in Africa were consuming a very high fiber diet. And therefore, within the diet, both these persons focused on dietary fiber. And then gradually, this expanded into our awareness of other nutritional factors, which also could be contributing to heart disease, such as high fat foods, etc. And then it was realized that nutrition is only one of the several lifestyle factors which contribute to chronic disease. And therefore, we started looking at lifestyle as a whole, and that the physical factors in lifestyle, such as diet, exercise, sleep, smoking, and drinking, and so on, these are not the only factors. Perhaps more important, although not so tangible, is that is the contribution made by mental stress. And we saw how the changes in the physical aspects of lifestyle over these centuries also indirectly led to greater mental stress. So gradually, these British physicians, Dennis Burkitt and Surgeon Captain Cleve, they made these observations sometime in the 1960s. But within another 30 years or so, people had realized that the unhealthy physical factors in lifestyle, of which mental stress is usually an accompaniment, are the major underlying causes of mental stress. Sorry, underlying cause of lifestyle diseases. So then began the exploration, the search for a healthier lifestyle and reduction in mental stress. And it is that which gradually converged on ancient disciplines such as yoga, which combine a superb lifestyle with very potent prescriptions for lasting mental peace. So that is how yoga entered modern medicine, and that is something which we shall see in greater detail tomorrow morning. Now, when it comes to uh, what we should do about the lifestyle, or if a doctor has to give advice on lifestyle, it's very easy, very simple. All one has to do is eat this, don't eat that. Take at least half an hour of exercise every day, preferably 1 hour, and don't smoke if you do. Don't stop drinking if you drink, and sleep enough. And if you are not sleeping enough, and don't worry about anything. The advice is over. Doesn't take even 5 minutes. But then, does it work? It doesn't work because changing the lifestyle is not easy. The patient walks out of the doctor's chamber, takes the pills that he has been prescribed very faithfully because that is convenient, and forgets about the changes in the lifestyle that have been advised in less than a minute. And Therefore, what is important is that one has to spend time on making the person more aware of the healthy lifestyle instead of this uh, advice which takes less than 5 minutes. And further, it helps if one fits it into the framework of a certain philosophy, a certain view of life, a certain way of life, which is what yoga is about. So when you fit it in with that, then not only the person then is more likely to make some changes in the lifestyle, but also these changes become more effective. Why they become more effective is because if the person is making those changes just because the person is wants to prevent disease, doesn't want to die too early, then he feels that, well, I have to do it because otherwise I'll die early. I'll get this disease and that disease and so on. But then the person is not enjoying it. Person is doing it because the person has to. And the result is that he's not happy about it. The person may be eating green vegetables, but at the same time, he's thinking of and missing omelets and cutlets. And the stress that results from the doing from the stress that results from being unable to eat what he likes more than neutralizes the good that eating the right things does. Uh, there are many studies which have shown that the mental factors, psychological factors can in fact override the physical factors when it comes to lifestyle. Now, what happens when you fit all this within the framework of philosophy? Then the person does not feel that he's doing it because he has to, but he does it because he wants to. Why does he want? Why does he want to? Because now he looks at life differently, and therefore he starts enjoying what he's doing. And when he starts enjoying what he's doing, he finds that this lifestyle is not only healthier, but actually is more pleasant, gives more of genuine happiness than those fleeting sensory pleasures which were there, which were residing in the unhealthy lifestyle we're doing. So the person now wants to do it rather than has to do it. And that makes all the difference when it comes to the efficacy of changes in the physical factors in lifestyle. And therefore, that's how um, this person is able to make these changes in the lifestyle, which a person who just got that 2 minute advice from the doctor cannot easily do. He just sticks to the pills that have been prescribed or forgets about all the other advice very soon. Now, that doesn't mean that yoga is a system of medicine. Uh, Yoga is a system that was designed primarily for spiritual growth. But then health happens to be a fringe benefit, a side effect of this healthy lifestyle. For example, suppose you travel on a hot day in an air conditioned car. It's a pleasant journey because you don't feel the heat. But that's not what the car was designed for. That's only a side effect. That's only a fringe benefit by getting into an air conditioned car. The car was designed primarily to go from one place to another. In the same way, yoga was also designed to go from one place to another, from the place where we are towards where we should be going to fulfill the purpose of life. But then, as a fringe benefit, we also get better health. And therefore, any system of medicine can take some elements of yoga and utilize them for preventing disease as well as managing these lifestyle diseases. Modern medicine has been doing so for the last, um, one can say, 60, 70 years now. Ayurveda did it thousands of years ago. So, in fact, you find that various elements of yoga are an integral part of Ayurveda. Hmm. So, with this, I can stop here. And if there are any questions in relation to what I've spoken during the last half an hour or so, we can take those up before going any further.
Good morning, Dr. Bijlani. I really appreciate the way you introduced the subject today. And I want to, focus on one point which you very rightly said, that uh, if we do something thinking that we have to do, that is really stressful, and what we want to do. That because I earlier this never came to my mind, because whatever I was doing just thinking that my health will improve. Sometimes I used to miss those things which are unhealthy for me. But now listening to you, I realize that I have to change my mindset to, keep wanting to do the healthy things. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mm.
In the same context, we have another question. How do we know the difference between wanting and just doing?
And the difference is whether you're enjoying it or are you doing it as a burden that has to be carried for the sake of staying healthy. If you're enjoying it, you want to do it.
Can I add to it, Dr. Bijlani?
Mm.
Because I just give you an example of anger. Because I practice Buddhism, so my leaders told me the difference between controlling anger and not getting angry. Because they told me that anger, because having anger leads to so many problems. So I told them that okay, I'll control my anger. Whenever I'm angry, I'll try to do something. They said no, you don't even have to get angry, because you have to train your mind not to feel bad about certain things which make you angry. This is what I feel for this also, for wanting,
Exactly.
isn't it?
It applies to anger, it applies to desires in general, it applies to the healthy lifestyle.
There's another question in the chat box. How to address the conflict that comes from being in friend and family settings where junky food is the center of the meeting?
Well, the simplest answer would be that one can still select out of what is available. And if what is available is all unhealthy, then procure something healthy. But then here, one has to also see that there are many generations residing together. And uh, on one hand, the younger generation will tend to eat whatever those who are uh, responsible for stocking the food in the house are doing. And therefore, those who generally go for shopping for food, they are the ones who have a certain responsibility to make sure that, as far as possible, unhealthy food is not around. Uh, but then one also has to concede that if some of the palatable food will not be available in the house, then the younger people will have a tendency to eat more outside or get food from outside. And therefore, one has to, on one hand, uh, try and also make the healthy food more palatable, which is possible because all um, healthy food is not necessarily unpalatable. For example, a sweet apple, uh, there's no such a real reason why a sweet apple cannot be as pleasing as, say, a gulab jamun or a real sweet or a dessert. So it's just a way of thinking. So there can be healthy food which is palatable, and that is what one has to learn to appreciate as a family. And secondly, add to the uh, food other factors, psychological factors, and other things, and like the family trying to eat together at least one meal a day, starting the meal with a prayer, ending the meal with a prayer, uh, eating in a peaceful atmosphere. These are some of the things which also help in because they are a part of that. They are rooted to the yogic philosophy, and these are some of the things which uh, make it possible to enjoy food which is both healthy and palatable. In traditional language, we call it the shreyas and prayas. Shreyas is what really truly is good, and prayas is what feels good. Now, there seems to be a conflict between the two, but then in one way of looking at yogic discipline is that you can make what is shreyas also prayas. That is, what is truly good can also become very pleasant, because then you don't really care for what normally is considered prayers or pleasant. And the Mediterranean diets, which particularly olive oil, which is a part of the Mediterranean diets, which is one of the fads, which has been one of the fads for several decades now. We forget that the Mediterranean diet has not only olive oil and some of the other things which we may consider healthy, but Mediterranean Mediterranean culture is also such that they tend to eat together in a peaceful atmosphere. That's also a part of that culture. So one has to look at that culture as a whole rather than take one isolated thing like olive oil.
There's another question in the chat box. Thank you for this enriching introduction. Youngsters usually take health for granted and feel that it will stay forever unless we face some health issue. Is there a way one can enable adolescents and younger children to embrace a healthier lifestyle?
There's no simple answer to it. One way in which it cannot be done is by sermonizing. Um, that is just telling this is right, this is wrong, do this and don't do that. Um, that is what generally does not work. But if there is a sound sort of education, not directed at do's and don'ts, since early childhood in schools as well as at home, that will build the foundation for it. And um, young people are more likely to be convinced by rationality and evidence. So trying to base um, and give the type of knowledge which fits within that framework. And now there are plenty of studies available on the efficacy of healthy lifestyle, and even of the relationship between the lifestyle becoming healthy and the disease manifesting later. Uh, there are documented studies. One of the studies which many young people would appreciate is in that, there are studies done in a few universities where they were studied when they were young people in their 20s while they were studying in the university, and questionnaires were given to assess uh, just their psychological status. And then these people were followed up 30 years later. And they are very laborious studies because difficult to find the same people. And perhaps these studies did not find all the same people 30 years later. But even a small fraction that they found was enough to give valuable data. So what they found was that when you study these people 50 years later, you find that those who were under stress, psychologically not well adjusted in their 20s, continue to be so even when they are in their 50s. Those who were happier in their 20s also continue to be happier in their 50s. This again tells us one thing, that over these 30 years, life would have leveled everybody, so that and they would have, all of them would have seen some ups and downs. But if in spite of that, the way they were psychological in their 20s, they continue to be even in their 50s, means that stress depends more on how the individual copes with the stress, how the individual looks at a stressful situation rather than the situation itself. Now, secondly, what is more relevant is that in their 20s, I'm sure hardly any of them had any lifestyle disease. But when they studied these individuals 30 years later, they found that those who were happier individuals, they had about a 50% chance of having at least one midlife disease, such as heart disease or diabetes or cancer. But amongst those who were unhappy, those who were psychologically not well adjusted, there was an almost 100% probability of having at least one such disease. Now, the difference is 50% versus 100%. The risk becomes double and just related to psychological factors. So, firstly, psychological factors are important. How about those who are happy and still there had a 50% chance of having one of these diseases? That may be related to two things primarily. One is the physical factors in lifestyle, and secondly, the genetic factors. So, heredity does contribute, but it's physical factors which we call modifiable factors, which one can change. And then one can change them more effectively if one fits them into a philosophy. not only one can change them more easily, but the change also becomes more effective because then the uh, person wants to do it rather than has to do it. So this type of studies, I think, should be more convincing. That, well, doesn't mean that if I have nothing now, I can get away with it. I have to wait for the disease to manifest, because these are not diseases which will manifest immediately. They are, they are not acute diseases like a common cold or diarrhea. These are diseases which will keep growing gradually, uh, and the earliest signs may be seen at a microscopic level as early as the age of 5 years. Fatty streaks in arteries can be seen at 5 years of age, which are the progenitors of the beginning of the process of atherosclerosis or the blockage of arteries. So fatty streaks can be seen as early as 5 years, at the age of 5 years. So it's the slow accumulation of damage over decades that eventually makes the disease manifest.
I just wanted to add one thing while you were saying this, and usually we have this concern with not just youngsters but also everybody. Like every human being likes to here and there eat something unhealthy. I think one of the lenses which can be looked at is to connect more with the body. Like though we eat for the body, but we eat through the mind and the emotions. So if we feel connected more and more to the body consciousness and become more aware of what the physical needs, the craving for unhealthy will naturally drop because you will become more aware that what I'm eating, is it setting well with my body or not? So you will be more influenced by the body needs rather than your mind, like the stress eating or the emotional eating and all of those things. So I think as young as possible, if we can bring more awareness into the physical existence of my being, and that food is more for my physical health and not get diverted through the marketing schemes which cater to our mind and emotions, that will automatically influence and gravitate us towards the healthy eating without so much of do's and don'ts. It will be a very natural choice. So that is also one way to include that body connectedness as young as possible. So that is one way which I think is practical.
Yes, I think it's a very valuable addition to be aware that of the fact that food is not a source of sensory pleasure. Food is a source of nourishment for the body so that the bodily instrument can work better. Uh, so this is a very important thing that uh, ch- children should learn uh, more through example than through, again, teaching since early childhood. If they find their parents selecting food on the basis of what will be good for us in terms of health, when they go to buy food or when you have food at the table, then that is what. And if that becomes a part of the mealtime prayer, let me always select for health rather than for taste. So if that becomes a part of the mealtime prayer, then that's how the children learn. But actually, what happens in practice very often is just the opposite. The child is refusing to eat. And then you tell the child, okay, if you don't want to eat normal food, here is a chocolate for you. Here is some sweet for you. Here is some ice cream. We'll have only ice cream. Now, which means that the more important thing is uh, you must eat. And secondly, um, we are trying to tempt the child by providing something which is more palatable, which means that we are making the child indirectly interpret that food is a source of sensory pleasure. And also, what is worse is sometimes the child picks up the signals. They knows that food is something by which I can manipulate parents. I can make them do what I want if I refuse to eat. So then I'll get whatever I want, or if I refuse to eat, then they'll listen to what I want. Whereas it should be just the opposite. Uh, as you said, that the child should grow up with the idea that food is not a source of sensory pleasure. It is something which is meant to nourish the body. Thank you, Aditi. And Aditi, if you have anything to say, you can please do share it with all of us and then wind up the session.
I just want to say that whatever we have discussed, maybe if we can collectively hold that aspiration, that we might not change everything about our lifestyle, but at least bring some change and see that aspiration in the beginning, that whatever we will go through in this module, we'll try to bring it into our life and also in the life of people around. So this will be a good aspiration to seed and end with a moment of silence.